It all started with a missing USB drive. In the office where I worked, small things went missing, sometimes pens, notebooks, cheap gadgets. Nobody paid much attention to it. But this was different. This USB wasn't ordinary. People started whispering that it contained sensitive information, things that were never meant to leave the company. At first, I didn't care. It wasn't my problem. But the more I heard about it, the more I became curious. Everyone was talking about it in fragments, never fully explaining what was on it. That uncertainty stuck in my head. One day, I saw where it was usually kept. Just a simple desk drawer. No lock. No real protection. That was the moment the idea formed in my mind, not fully shaped yet, but already there. I told myself I was just observing. Just curious. But deep down, something had already started. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I began paying attention to routines, movements, who stayed late, who left early. I started mentally mapping the office like it was a system I needed to understand. I noticed the security cameras. I learned their blind spots just by watching over several days. I even wrote notes disguised as work tasks so no one would suspect anything. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just thinking. But the truth was, I was planning. What surprised me most was how natural it started to feel. At first, it felt like curiosity. Later, it felt like preparation. And eventually, it felt inevitable. I wasn't asking whether I should do it anymore. I was figuring out how. By the time I chose the day, everything was already in place in my mind. I picked a night when the office would be nearly empty due to an event. I made sure people thought I was going home early because I felt unwell. I even repeated that story in advance so it sounded natural. I prepared an excuse in case I got caught. I would say I forgot documents. Simple. Believable. But despite all the planning, I couldn't sleep properly. Every night, I felt a strange pressure in my chest. Part of me wanted to stop everything. Another part of me just waited for the moment to arrive. On the day itself, I acted completely normal. I worked, joined meetings, joked with colleagues. Nothing about me looked different. But inside, I was counting every hour. When I finally said I was leaving early, nobody questioned it. That made it easier and worse. Instead of going home, I stayed hidden in a small meeting room. I waited until the office emptied completely. The silence that followed felt unnatural. Every sound in the building suddenly became louder. When I finally stood up, I knew there was no turning back. I walked toward the office where the USB was kept. The hallway was empty. The door wasn't locked. That surprised me more than anything. After all the planning, I expected obstacles, but there were none. Inside the office, the USB was exactly where I expected it to be. A simple drawer. Easy access. When I held it in my hand, I froze. For a moment, I realized I could still walk away. I could close the drawer and leave everything unchanged. But I didn't. And then I heard footsteps outside. I froze the moment I heard the footsteps outside the office. It wasn't loud, but in that quiet building it felt like a warning siren going off in my head. My entire body reacted before I even had time to think. I instinctively closed the drawer, shoved the USB into my pocket, and tried to look like I belonged there. The door opened. A maintenance worker stepped in. I recognized him vaguely from around the building, someone who usually blended into the background and never asked unnecessary questions. But at that exact moment, he was the last person I wanted to see. He paused when he saw me. There was a short silence that felt much longer than it actually was. "Still here?" he asked casually. I forced myself to smile, even though my face felt stiff. I said something about forgotten documents, trying to sound relaxed, like I had every right to be there. My voice sounded normal, but inside I was shaking so badly I thought it might be visible. He nodded without much interest and walked further inside the office, already losing attention to me. That should have been the moment I left immediately. But I didn't. I waited just long enough to make sure he wasn't watching me anymore, then slowly walked out of the room with the USB still in my pocket. That was the first time I truly understood how close I had come to being caught. The walk toward the exit felt unreal, almost detached from my own body. Every step down the hallway felt louder than it should have been, like the building itself was aware of what I had done. I kept telling myself to act normal, to breathe normally, to not draw attention, but nothing about me felt normal anymore. The USB in my pocket suddenly felt heavy, almost physical proof of what I had done. When I reached the reception area, I slowed down even more. The security guard barely looked up from his screen. That should have made me feel relieved, but instead it made everything feel stranger. How could something so serious feel so invisible? I greeted him casually, pretending everything was just another normal end of the workday. He responded without suspicion. And then I walked out of the building. The cold air outside hit my face instantly, and for the first time that evening I felt like I could breathe properly. But the relief didn't last long. Instead of calm, I felt a strange emptiness mixed with tension. I wasn't just leaving work, I was leaving with something that didn't belong to me, something that could change everything if discovered. I stood outside for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the building, realizing there was no easy way to undo what had already happened. Back home, I didn't immediately plug it in. I just sat there for a while, staring at the USB on my desk like it was something alive. My mind kept going back and forth between curiosity and fear. Part of me wanted to throw it away without ever knowing what was inside. Another part of me couldn't stop wondering what kind of information could cause so much secrecy and tension in the office. Eventually, curiosity won. I connected it to an old laptop I barely used anymore. The moment the files appeared on the screen, my assumptions completely fell apart. I expected something simple: documents, work files, maybe some internal reports. Instead, I found structured folders filled with sensitive internal communication, financial data, and private exchanges that clearly were not meant for outside eyes. The deeper I went, the worse it became. Some files referenced decisions and transactions that made no sense to me at first. Others showed conversations between people in the company speaking in a way that felt calculated, careful, and intentionally hidden. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't just ordinary corporate data, it was something much more delicate, something that would create serious consequences if exposed. I had to stop several times just to get up and walk away from the screen. And that's when it really hit me. I wasn't just holding a stolen object anymore. I was holding something dangerous, information that could affect real people, real careers, and possibly more. The next morning at work, I paid closer attention to everything. At first, nothing seemed unusual. People were talking normally, working as usual, acting like any other day. For a brief moment, I even convinced myself that maybe the missing USB wasn't as important as I had thought. That illusion didn't last long. By mid-morning, I noticed subtle changes in behavior. Small clusters of people talking quietly, conversations that stopped when someone approached, a general sense of tension that wasn't there before. Then I heard it directly: the USB was missing, and people were actively looking for it. The owner was asking around, trying to reconstruct the last known location. I stayed calm, even when I joined the conversation. In fact, I actively participated, offering suggestions about possible places it could have been left. It was surreal. I was helping search for something I had taken. And the worst part was how natural it felt. No one questioned me. No one suspected anything. I wasn't acting like someone hiding a secret, I was acting like everyone else. But inside, I felt completely different. Every sentence I spoke felt like it could expose me if I made a single mistake. Still, I kept going, because stopping would have made me stand out even more. A few days later, the situation escalated. What started as a simple search turned into something more structured and serious. Meetings were being held behind closed doors, and certain employees were being called in one by one for private conversations. When I received my turn, I already knew what I would say. I had rehearsed it in my head so many times that it felt automatic. I told them I left early that day because I wasn't feeling well. I said I hadn't noticed anything unusual. I kept my answers short, consistent, and calm. But something in the atmosphere felt different. The person interviewing me didn't seem fully satisfied. They didn't accuse me of anything, but their eyes lingered a little too long after each answer. It felt like they were not just listening to what I said but watching how I said it. When I left the room, I could feel my heart beating harder than usual. For the first time, I seriously considered the possibility that I might not be as invisible in this situation as I had been telling myself. That night, I couldn't relax at all. Every small noise outside my apartment made me look up. Every notification on my phone made me tense. Something had shifted, and I could feel it closing in. Over the next week, the tension never fully disappeared. It just settled into the background of everything I did. Work felt heavier. Conversations felt sharper. Even normal routines started to feel suspicious. I began checking the USB more often, even though nothing about it had changed. It became almost obsessive, like I needed to confirm it still existed, still under my control. At the same time, rumors at work were growing. People were talking about possible external investigations, security audits, even reviewing camera footage from the night it disappeared. I tried to act unaffected, but internally I was constantly calculating risks. Every interaction felt like it might contain a hidden test. What made it worse was that I couldn't tell if the pressure was real or if I was amplifying it myself. My thoughts were becoming harder to separate from reality. And underneath everything else, a quieter feeling started growing. Regret mixed with uncertainty. Not just about what I had done, but about why I had done it at all. The moment it happened, I knew it was wrong. During a casual conversation at work, someone mentioned details about the missing USB. It was supposed to be vague discussion, nothing important. But I reacted too quickly. I added a comment that included a detail I should not have known. There was a pause. Then someone looked at me differently. "Wait," they said. "How do you know that?" My stomach dropped immediately. For a second, I couldn't think of anything. My mind went completely blank under pressure. Then I quickly improvised a story about hearing it in passing during another conversation. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. They accepted it. The conversation moved on. But I didn't. That moment stayed in my head for the rest of the day. It was the first time I truly felt how fragile my position was. I wasn't being actively investigated, but I could still expose myself through a single careless sentence. And that realization changed how I behaved from that point onward. After that incident, I couldn't keep pretending everything was under control. The stress had built up to a point where I was constantly on edge, even in situations that had nothing to do with the USB anymore. One night, I finally took it out again and placed it on the table. I just stared at it for a long time. I tried to think logically. I listed options in my head. Destroy it. Return it. Hide it better. Do nothing. Every choice had consequences, and none of them felt safe anymore. What scared me most was not the USB itself, but the fact that I no longer trusted my own judgment. Eventually, I made a decision not because it was right, but because I needed the situation to stop escalating in my mind. At that moment, I believed I was reducing risk. I was wrong. That decision became the point where everything started moving toward an outcome I couldn't control anymore. I returned the USB anonymously, leaving it where it could be found without connecting it directly to me. I thought that would close the entire situation. For a brief moment, it even seemed like it worked. Soon after, the company announced that the device had been recovered. People were relieved. The tension at work slowly faded. Conversations shifted back to normal topics. The investigation stopped being a central focus. On the surface, everything was over. But inside me, nothing changed. I didn't feel relief. I felt uncertainty. Because I had no idea what had been discovered during the time the USB was missing, or what conclusions people might have drawn. Even without accusations, I felt exposed. And that feeling never fully went away. The most difficult part wasn't what happened externally, it was the internal awareness that I had crossed a line I couldn't mentally return from. Years later, the memory still stays with me. The job is long gone, and most of the people involved have moved on with their lives. From the outside, it looks like nothing significant ever happened. Just a small office incident that was eventually resolved. But I remember everything. For a long time, I told myself different explanations for why I did it. Curiosity, pressure, opportunity. But over time, I realized those were just ways of avoiding the truth. I made a choice. No one forced me. No one pushed me into it. I created the situation step by step, and I lived with the consequences afterward. What stayed with me wasn't the act itself, but everything that followed: the constant awareness, the fear of being discovered, and the mental weight of knowing I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. If there is one thing I took from it, it's this. Some decisions feel small when you make them, but their consequences can follow you far longer than you expect.